solving problems together by combining historical, climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne. Right along here with Ransom Godwin tonight. Appreciate your time. So all we have is time, limited time. Time is a commodity, so thank you for spending it with us. It's all about talking the next, I guess, set of distraction. It's not even events anymore. You know, in my mind, it's distractions. You could look at it as a world event, but I'm looking at it as a world distraction because the things in the heavens are becoming so noticeable that there needs to be a distraction from that. The causation of man-made not working anymore. Distraction time. So have you seen the world's distractions? It seems like we had a breath of fresh air and it's starting to ramp up again. Have you noticed that? There was kind of a little breathing moment there. So during that time, instead of chasing the news, I was learning about electroculture. Playing from the Earth's ether by using copper wire wrapped around a branch and then put it in the ground where you're going to be growing some garden vegetables, fruits, crops, whatever. And how to tap the natural, ever-flowing ether from ground level to the ionosphere. That ether that Tesla talked about, grabbing that, harnessing that, tapping that to create never-ending perpetual electricity. You're tapping into the same force, but because it is copper wiring following Schauberger principles, you can use that to energize or electro-energize, remagnetize the soils for a higher growth, yield output, size output, weight output. So that's what I've been studying with my free time here. I made a video about that today with anybody who's interested in looking at the graphics. You know, this whole electroculture came out in 1755, and the greenhouses of England and France at the time all had electroculture in place devices that were permanently installed there. But they were big girders with all the copper off of it, off a central lead wire going into their growth medium or strata inside a castle's greenhouse. That's what they're using in 1755. I see why they were doing that. They're telling the peasants out there, use your pig poo. The whole while they had the ancient knowledge of just putting a copper wire up and harnessing the electromagnetic activity of our own atmosphere and get higher plant yield from that. Pesticides, nope, don't need them. Herbicides, supposedly not needed. I'm testing. And fertilizers not needed either. Oh, wait, we don't need the supply chain, local solutions. So, Ransom, I'm glad you're joining me tonight because I could just ramble on, getting lost in the past with the Antiquitech. So, appreciate you joining, and I know there's a lot of people hungry for the ideas we're going to spin tonight. Thank you, everybody on Rumble, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, listening to us live here from the Revolution Radio feed. Ransom, floor is yours.
Happy Thursday. Yeah.
Whoa, fully.
When you were talking about that, I kept thinking about all these videos I keep seeing of people that feel better, like their blood seems to be working better and all kinds of stuff, that not only did they just do it for a little bit of time, which was go ground outside with their bare feet, but I've seen people push that whole idea all the way to wrapping a copper wire around their big toe so that when they sleep at night, they're grounded to the earth. There's obviously some power to that. So what do you think it does to the plants and animals that share that charge, I guess it is, with the earth? I mean, why do you think that's so powerful? And do you think that's the same thing that the ancients were tripping on when they used all of these highly quartzite rocks to build these giant megaliths, because there's a lot of evidence that they were trying to charge seeds under some of these rocks, and allegedly they would grow way better after they were charged. I don't know what the science would be behind that, but that's actually been a thing that I've been noticing or lately. I just got into it by these videos I was watching. But what do you think that is? Is that just an equilibrium with the Earth, so that we share its charge, and it just kind of resets you, kind of like the internal clock we do, or that it gets the cicada rhythm that we get reset every morning if we get up in the morning on time and we open our eyes to the sun. An entire change happens to our brain, and we get all kinds of endorphins, and then it sets our clock. And it's from what I've read, is very important for people's health, because they're extremely more healthy than people that don't do that. Obviously, you're more into that idea, studying like Tesla and those kind of ideas, because he seemed to be on the same idea that you could just tap into this charge that's a natural charge within the Earth. And not only could you power vehicles, transmit information, but you could psychically connect to that same thing. And there's a lot of rumors that he actually was speaking to, Martians or some kind of entities out there when he would go into these long trances. And he didn't even sleep that much, but he had all of these wonderful ideas. And it seems like the totality of his work revolved around the electric universe, electricity and magnetism, and our connection to not only a ether of energy and charge possibly, but also the physical charge of the Earth that we have to live on.
Hey, describe the Schumann resonance right there. Now you have to realize that there is an energetic layer that holds the solar system and the galaxy together. That's there as the base layer that allows all of what we understand as third dimensional rules to exist in time, space, gravity, etc. But there's other steps below that where the same rules just don't apply. You're stepping down into the quantum world. Okay, but what happens if you get below that? There's a vibrating field of energy, the etheric, for a better term, that allows it all to even construct into form, whether it be in the quantum or in the third dimensional molecular atom size and bigger. That's what you're tapping into. We might call it the Schumann resonance because it's vibrating in a certain frequency. I guess we're all sharing the sea of energy across the planet in the atmosphere. That's what's being tapped into. Now, I understand that as our sun changes output, that also can change as well. Their frequency, it's a wave, it's a vibration. It's going to equalize with the larger current that's out, inbound or outbound, shrinking current, enlarging current. That's what's being thought about, tapped into, because I had the craziest idea. It seems that a lot of the soils that we have been farming in and been using for the last, say, 10,000 years have become so demagnetized and high iron. Dr. Hammaker talked about this also in a cycle that might overlap, so I'm going to share my idea. So the idea is by putting the copper and remagnetizing the soils, which have been depleted over 10,000 years or so since the exit out of the last ice age, Younger Dryas event. We were coming out of the ice age, started to warm up, boom, hit by the comet on the ice sheet, and everything cooled back down for, another 2,000 years. And then we started to come out of it. And then we finally started to come out of what you can see the quote unquote interglacial 10,000 years ago. Well, Hammaker talks about, this is Dr. Hammaker's work, his work, was saying that coming out of these ice ages, the soils are remineralized, everything reforests. You get trees that are 300 feet tall across the entire planet. And it's just like this breathing organism ecosystem of just the most prolific it could possibly be after you come out of an ice age, because all the soils have been reground up and all those nutrients from the entire planet's crust have been redistributed on the top layer. So you get the most vibrant growth like 10,000 years prior to just things you're unimaginable for today, truly unimaginable. 600-foot tall trees, because the minerals were completely mineralized. The soils were. Right now, we have a very depleted mineralization in the soil, so you could get granite dust and mix that in, and that should remineralize a lot of your soils. So the same thing goes with the depletion of magnetism, especially in areas that have been gardened for a little while, like running your iron tools through that again and again for like years. There's gonna be a difference in the charge in the soil. So if you put the copper back in, that grabbing into the ether within, the ground level, all the way up 100 miles, that using Schauberger principles spins itself down the wire. That etheric life force follows the copper. Schauberger style. When I mean that, I really mean vortices style. So you need to make sure how you wrap that wire around whatever implement you're putting it in. It needs to be oriented correctly, and it recharges the soil basically. But the whole thing about tapping into that layer, that base layer, I'm surprised we never went to that. And what even surprises me even more is that we are transitioning to windmills and solar panels when we could easily tap straight into what Tesla was working with in Marconi, who in a radio inventor. He understood the vibratory pattern also that you could tap into. He was able to ride on top of that. That's another person not too many people talk about is Marconi, the developer of the offshore radio, ship-to-shore radio. Like that also entails you completely understanding waves traveling through the atmosphere and how to capture them in a single band. This is this kind of era, all going back, tapping into the same. I just don't know why we've jumped back into solar panels when we could be tapping into the ether or the Earth's magnetic field to drive devices. Ransom, I sound like a broken record talking about this myself, man. There's so many, these nasty shysters out here getting us back on a metered system that's inferior to something that could be put out.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to mention that, at this point, we already know that the materials that it takes to build all of that, when it starts breaking down, is the exact opposite of a great environment for growing food. If you're using little panels to power little things, of course, you can take care of its destruction whenever it's broken and old. But on the massive scale that they're doing, like where I live, not far from me is a giant field in the desert that's just full of them. And, not only does it change the natural temperature of the area, but also think about all of the things that do not grow underneath there anymore. And the wildlife that, is deprived a whole area to eat and things. So the whole technology on itself, from windmills to solar panels, in my opinion, is the exact opposite that you would need to go green, so to speak, or help the earth in any kind of meaningful way. Indeed, it does the opposite by putting so much toxic stuff out there, the way that they manufacture it, the way that they mine for the materials that it takes to make that, and then the outcome of it when it gets disposed of. There's giant fields buried of windmills right now. And then when those break down, talk about some forever chemicals. But besides that, a minute ago, I kind of went into this little a vision in my head when you were talking about, what happened on the last ice age as far as all of these granite materials being ground up and pushed, so to speak, down the side of the planet, down the river systems, ground into the soils, on all the places that these glaciers would move and they would grow. And if you think about that, just, by itself, it seems like that rhythm of ice age growing and then disappearing and then growing and disappearing might be actually one of the main mechanisms of life on Earth, if you think about that, because how else would these materials get recycled back into the ecosystem of plants and animals if not for this freeze, unfreeze, freeze, unfreeze cycle? It's almost seemingly just as important as the tilt of the earth and the movement of the moon controlling the tides and some of the animals and plants and the cycles of everything that grows on Earth, including all of the microorganisms, because people forget about that a lot of these algae, bacterium, and things like that have their own cycles, and some of those are manipulated by the environment. So every time one of these cycles comes forward and goes back, there's a whole spectrum of different niches for life. And it seems like if that stopped, imagine the extinction process that would happen after that.
Yeah, it would be all of a sudden and then at once, as nothing, you could keep it going on with smaller and smaller species. But, that cycle of ice scraping across the planet and depositing, remineralizing soils, all that runoff in all the rivers and all the oceans. Think about that. Lower ocean, higher oceans, whatever, the entire place being remineralized through the water and through the soil itself. But think about, in that cycle, also encapsulated a slosh of oceans over certain land masses, shorelines, or continents, depending on the severity of the tilt during a no magnetic field event. Now, these have been talked about through time immemorial by every single culture ever to be on the planet, that our planet has tilted, the sun has risen in the wrong sky and reversed. It would rising in the east and setting in the west, but suddenly one day the planet stops for some many hours and the side of the planet gets scorched, and there's a myth about that, and then suddenly the sun rises from the west and sets in the east. Like, this is normal talk of the planet sloshing on. So I'm wondering what the cycle is that, yeah? Because imagine if it only tilted, say, 17 degrees in one kind of tilt, and it only, went 50 miles in every shore across the entire planet, but scoured that completely, making way for new life as well along coastal areas, compared to one where it would tilt 90 degrees and the wave would be 1,000 feet tall across every single continent, across the entire planet, scraping everything completely new. Noah, for an example, in that kind of flood, and the cycles in between and the severity, like these ice ages too. If you go back about 2 million years and look at the ice age record on the depths of the cooling and the maximum ice sheet extent across the northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere as well. Like what we're experiencing or had experienced in the last glaciation was sort of a normal one. There's other super glaciation events too, which it seems it's about 5 or 4 of those cycles culminates in a super glaciation event. Not a snowball Earth by any means, nothing like that. But definitely, like, the ice would go 20% further down north or further up south, or 10%. That kind of increase in the ice sheets would be thicker as well. But still, it's on the clockwork, or regardless if it's a super glaciation event, it turns off right in the interglacial like clockwork. Doesn't matter if it's a heavy one or light one, we all get the interglacial. So what turns that on, Ransom, since you're talking about longer cycles of time here? Any mechanisms for the on-off switch, glaciation, non-glaciation, interglacial?
I'd have to say that was the sun for 500.
There's a new car behind the door too. Ding, ding.
Right. No, I would think that's pretty obvious that, not only would there be universal influences we probably don't know about that are in a cycle that affect Earth every so often. We already know that the sun has its own complex set of cycles, and there's so many cycles that I don't even think that humans at this point, maybe with quantum computing now, could predict exactly which or how the cycle will fold out. If I've learned anything from modern astrology and space sciences, I guess you would say, is that every single day it seems like scientists are having to admit that they just have no idea how the universe works. And I think it's because they won't look in the right direction, that there's an electromagnetic cycle that happens that they haven't given credit, for pulling the strings in the universe. Like, just for example, we know that there are, galaxies that seem like they were produced overnight, so to speak, in cosmic years, compared to some of the galaxies that we're used to seeing. Now that we're looking in deep space, we're finding stars and things like that are older than the supposed Big Bang theory. So we know that, there was a whole lot going on before even the most recent discoveries that we've put up our theories on, and they don't seem to be panning out. So who knows how many cycles, who knows which parts of space we would go through. And, that's assuming that we can see or detect everything. And from what I've seen of the study of near Earth objects, that's near to impossible to see any objects coming our way before they're really, so to speak, solar, like on our doorstep. I could remember at least 20, I think, in the past year or two of near Earth objects that were asteroids or other that flew right by the Earth, and they didn't even know they were there until the following day, or right when they were passing the Earth. Sometimes they spot them, but the majority of the time they're just flying by us in space, and they have no way to predict or know. And any one of these objects could, change the path of life on Earth, as they have in the past, as we know. Like, we had an ice age, and this is a question I have. We know we had a lot of impactors happen right about the end of the Pleistocene there. The Hunger Dryas, showed us that something big and bad happened to Earth. But is that connected to the sun, or was that something outside of the natural cycle of our sun? Meaning that the end of the last ice age, it so happens to match up to the last ice age periods or glacial periods. But can you imagine something hitting the Earth that just throws that cycle out of whack in a way that would just change the whole course of how things grow on Earth? So there's really no telling what a catalyst would be. There seems to be so many that we've discovered already. The inner workings of the inside of the Earth, which seem to be directly connected to what's going on in the sun. And then, 2 or 3 burps from the sun can sterilize the Earth and, restart everything. And who knows how to, is there a cycle for that? Like, when we look out at space, it's very rare for us to see these giant burps, when stars go supernova. Was it last week or so that they were all in a tizzy because a big burp came out of what they call a black hole, and that kind of put the whole theory of the black hole on its head, because matter was coming out of it on each end, and it looked a lot like some of these so-called supernovas in the way that it beamed out high energy out of either end of it. We have no idea, but we do have, ice age samples, ice core samples that show us that we have a pretty regular glacial and interglacial period that depends on what the sun's doing. But these impactors that come in every so often, or volcanic, burps that may be bigger than on other cycles, seem to be one of the main things that really set back the planet as far as human beings and civilization. And that seems to be directly tied to the sun as well. So the sun will decide when volcanic activity happens on Earth, and there's nothing that man can do. No amount of tax paid, no amount of planning can stop any of those, predictable and historically accurate events that have already happened and will happen. So it's kind of delusional to think that we're not going to have to deal with that at some point. It's just a question of, will it be our generation, our children's generation, their children's generation? And when you think about that, you realize that all depended on, all of civilization on Earth depended on seed savers. I give credit due to the hunters and gatherers, but think about the seed savers. If people wouldn't have had the forethought to start saving and domesticating seeds, we wouldn't even be here, period. So that's obviously, one of the first things that you would think of how are we going to navigate the future? Well, it seems like ancient man already taught us that if we don't save seeds, there may come a time when we will all starve to death. And speaking of that, we've been talking a lot about, food and the way it's distributed and the lack thereof, and the potential for, problems in the future from supply chains and not enough food growth. And then I see, articles out that talk about how the Western world will be basically completely obese by 2035. Now, how does that fit into, the changeover of food? Is it more that they're just going to give more and more food-like stuffs instead of actual nutritious food, and that's their prediction, the system's prediction that they're gonna, and it almost reminds me, kind of, not to be that way, but fattening up your hog for the slaughter, so to speak. But we would feed our hogs some nutritious organic stuff, but that's not what's being fed to the public. So, why do you think that they're trying to predict people, that everybody's going to be obese? Is it like a reverse psychology to make people worried about eating too much and being healthy? Because I would agree that obese and healthy are two different things. However, they're making it seem like, that everybody eats too much. So, you know what? If that's true, then you won't mind rationing, and you won't mind a government-sponsored mandated reduction of food in a town near you.
Or a country near you called the UK, 2 tomatoes per purchase per person. And you knew it was coming. You knew it was coming. And they're already having a lot of people that'll go to the next store and get 2 more tomatoes. And the next store to get 2 more tomatoes. So now they're, again, I knew this would be coming along eventually. You could just see it in the playbook that now there's talk. I'm not saying they've done it yet. There's talk about how to limit the ability for you to go buy 2 tomatoes in one store and then jump to the next store and the next store and the next store. It's supposed to be 2 tomatoes per person. Per day, per week, who knows, on a per purchase now. But people are jumping over to do the next. Like, well, you took 2 tomatoes away from somebody else that should. You got 4 now. That's you broke the rationing by going to multiple spots. And they're trying to stop that. So the only thing I could possibly see is a registry card or facial recognition when you go to the checkout lane. You can see so clearly how that's moving in the UK, just all based on tomatoes. And, you were talking about the telluric currents in the crust of the planet. That change electromagnetically from the sun stepping down, that current inflow to our star comes from somewhere else. So that means there's a step down further afield in the next solar system over in another what you would consider constellation cluster in the sky removed from us. One of those currents has slowed down, which was connected to our planet. To our star that's connected to our planet. Both same. But you talked about the telluric currents, those being voltage cables in our Earth, and how people would sprout seeds under different quartzite rocks and different kind of mineral composition or mineral deposits in a rock sample from the crust. So how did they know that quartzite had so much extra energy to sprout the seeds? I wonder what kind of advantage there would be using that same method to sprout your seeds. Grow them into seedlings a little bit, and then hit them with the electroculture from that point out in your gardens or field. Like using that benefit of seed starter with the quartzite rock to get that benefit. Okay, that's at the sprouting stage, and then move it and have all the different copper availability for those plants to uptake with the remagnetized soils in electroculture. I don't know. I'm just trying to put a circle to that thing there.
Well, think about this, David. The whole thing that we were just talking about a little while ago about how the glaciation cycle brings down all of this granite and different quartzite rock and grounds it into pieces and puts it into the soil and the streams and the deltas, doing essentially exactly that. Wouldn't it be the same thing as, it seems like a more focused thing that some of the ancient people were doing with their seeds, like under these giant megaliths. But it seems like almost the same exact, procedure that the natural order of the glaciation cycle was doing. Maybe they knew about it.
Okay, so let me throw a bizarre one at you, if you would. What if quartzite dolmens, dolmens 3-sided or even 4-sided with the circle usually, super heavy, multi-ton blocks that basically make a square of rock so you can run from whatever it is, bombardment. But what if those were quartzite dolmens made out of multi-ton stones, and all it was a little sprouting greenhouse that every family had across their property. That's why they found millions and millions of them across the world that have been repurposed over the last 150 years for road building, construction, cornerstones, anything that involved taking those, since they're already preformed, breaking them into smaller pieces. There used to be millions of these dolmens across the planet in every country, millions of them. And they were always in the multi-ton blocks with, the square configuration. But how many were used specifically to take advantage of the minerals in those rocks that you're talking about, such density and such heaviness that there would be an electrical effect in that little room, otherwise known as a dolmen, to get the outcome to start to have some benefit to let the beginning of life process activate with those earth energies encapsulated in whatever. It could have been quartzite. What if there's something with ruby in it? I'm sure there's all kind of combinations. Some areas that are heavy in emerald or tourmalines or, these types of things. Imagine the different dolmens and large rock slabs that would be impregnated with low grade, like let's say emerald up through Pakistan. Imagine if you get a few of those multi-ton blocks and then make dolmens out of it. Like, how would that resonate differently than a quartzite multi-ton block dolmen? Or something kind of coming out of Myanmar in the ruby field area, where there'd be, micro rubies in the rock itself, igneous. How would that be? Multi-ton blocks full of like ruby crystallite in there. And you can imagine if you were a wealthy king or some of these aristocracies that have accumulated all those different multi-ton slabs with the different minerals and gemstone composition in it, to do the very same thing we're talking about. Start the process of life for the seedlings inside an electrical field of the minerals of the planet, because that's where it's going. It's going back into the same minerals. It's going back into the same vibrational frequency at the crust of the planet. Just the top foot, but still it's running on the same current and the same base telluric current flow across and in and down the planet 300 miles deep into the crust. There's that resonant base field that your plants are going to go into. So it would almost make sense, Start it in the medium you're going to put it into eventually.
Yeah, when you get into this whole idea about most of the sciences being tied back to an electric universe, you kind of see the robotic and AI revolution kind of in a different light. The more science comes out, when we're studying these massive networks of fungus interacting with all of the plants, trees, everything in the soil, we know there's a resonant electric field running through all of the soil that's on a life spectrum, not just the electromagnetics from the planet, but kind of like an internet of intelligent witness to the universe, kind of. I mean, there's no way to kind of measure the ability of what it's observing, all of the trees and plants and funguses and all of these things that are interactive. But we do know that it's like a internet of sorts. And it kind of tells you, if you think about that for a minute, why the push for an artificial one. And I wanted to talk about some of these headlines that are out right now that kind of, show you that this is the direction that they are definitely pushing for humans. Not only are they trying to control us in a way where we're not allowed to have thoughts and ideas, and they're doing that first by speech, and then they will move to every kind of form of artistic expression with the censorship. I mean, that's from what I'm seeing. Like, here's an article from Florida that would require bloggers to register with the government, register with the state, so that the state can come visit you for whatever reason, depending on who's in charge, about your thoughts, about what you're telling people. So when you combine that with some of these other ideas, like more than half of the world will be overweight. It's kind of like one of those things where they're telling you, hey, look, there's too many people on Earth. They need to reduce them. But then you realize that some of those ideas are flawed, and there's actually a plateau happening in the population right now that was already predicted to start at about 8 billion people, just from the number of older people that are going to die off in the next couple of decades, and also the reduction of the majority of the Western world having a reduced birth rate for one reason or another. But here's one: human augmentation with robotic parts is at hand, say all these scientists, according to the Guardian here. But then here's this other one. Might be good news, or maybe it's just, the powers that be restricting who has this technology. But U.S. regulators rejected Elon Musk's bid to test brain chips in humans. So I don't know if that's a win, so to speak, or it's not, because it seems like as far as the government or these control mechanisms controlling these type of implants, they have no problem with that. And that's what they're talking about in this Guardian article, where the entire scientific revolution is accepting that transhumans are a thing now. And then here's this one. The government aid says it knows what voters want, and what that is an AI that controls everything. If you're worried about artificial intelligence bots breaking free from the human control, don't worry about it. Your government's gonna, take control of that and maybe use the AI to power governments, as they say in this. AI powered advisors. It's obviously going in a very weird direction with that. And here's a random thought I might tell you. You remember a while back when the administration, the Biden administration, so to speak, kind of attacked having gas stoves in your home? Well, this might be the reason. And I really do think this might be a consideration by the government on why they want to get rid of gas stoves. New Jersey woman fighting eviction blows herself up along with a whole house full of cats because she didn't want to be evicted. According to authorities, she just, turned on the stove and then fried all her kitties because she didn't want to be evicted. That's pretty crazy, but it seems like that's what you might expect if there was an electromagnetic interference in the thought processes of the people that live on Earth right now, kind of a hijacking of what you should be connected to. And that all circles back to this idea of grounding your plants and even people for better health and better growth, is to get off their grid and go more to the natural grid that was created by nature, and somehow navigate both of them and have benefit from it.
Yeah, it is a symbiosis. We're all interconnected some way. And, to talk about the AI, I need to bring up the Dog King, because Mike Adams had on, who did he have on just a couple nights ago? Was telling the story of, it'll come back to me, the name of the Dog King. Happened in Norway, 1600s, and it was a common thing apparently, is once your nation was conquered, you would actually put a coronation crown on a dog and put the dog in the chair of the king, and then orders would be given and said the dog told you what to do, but it was really the other, the victors carrying out the agendas, but it came from a dog. So at the point when people would just accept that anything that was told that the dog said, you knew that the people had been weakened to the point that they were at the collapse point, and they could do anything at that point, from taxation to restructuring to land grabbing, whatever. 1600 style. So there's an actual term for this called the Dog King, where they install a dog on the throne, and the people are so mind bent that they accept whatever comes from the dog without any repercussions or speak back. We're almost seeing, and we are seeing, the Dog King today. This of what we're seeing of all these agendas together are the Dog King of AI. That you're telling me that a computer just says it and we have to do it. That is no different than installing a Dog King in Finland or Norway in 1610 or 1630 than it would be to push AI across the planet, global UN telling you what to do. You have to do it. That is a Dog King for every single nation on the planet. Which, when I go back to dogs, I think about this. And you're talking about fat people, and these two thoughts kind of swing together here. When you talked about people eating the food of the planet and becoming so obese, it brought the thought back to the Greek mythos, the Greek legend era, Cyclops, Medusa, this era of exploration of lore and legend from the Greek time and prior. There was a story that I remember where there was exploration going on, Greeks sent vessel out, and it shipwrecked. And on shore, they were greeted by people and fed. There was only one guy who didn't eat. Everybody else ate, and they kept eating and eating and eating. They got super gigantically big, where all they did was eat 24/7 all day long. They couldn't stop eating. And then there was only one guy who didn't eat, and he just kept getting skinnier and skinnier. And then when it came time, they were harvested for food. The other guy, the skinny guy, they're like, hey, he's too skinny. We can't eat him. And then, off he went. They set him free. So all these different preservatives and these types of colors and sweeteners and these types of things, perhaps it's to sweeten the body for something else. Like, we wouldn't dig on it, but something else is. It's the same exact in the Greek mythos legend of the shipwrecked sailors that were fed something to make them incredibly fat. Like, back then, it was just, that's what's so absurd about it is, looking back at that time in history, the more healthy body because of the foods. And then even when this was produced, I remember seeing it in a movie in like the 1970s. Even at that time, there really weren't so many obese people on the planet comparatively. You see those pictures of the beaches in 1970, everybody looks, pretty healthy and stuff, compared to a beach today is like totally different. But think about that, even in the 70s, like to have everybody be so obese of eating a food that would trigger that. And, as shipwrecked sailors you'd have to go outside the scope of even what the society was in the 1970s to envision those people getting so big, like the blobs, they turned into like 300, 400 pounds, and then they were harvested. So, I don't know, between dog kings and shipwrecked sailors and Greek mythos, I don't know, we're getting into the 11 o'clock hour here soon, I think.
Well, think about this. Here in the near future, I mean, if everything goes to the way it seems to be being planned out by the powers that be, we'll get to a point where AI is controlling everything, not only like now when it controls the stock market and most of the articles you read, and even some of the movies you watch were written by an AI. It's been admitted that AI is in control of key infrastructure, various things from defense to the power grid. So when you realize this, and then they're talking about just going ahead and putting some AI in charge of governing, you may come to a point where no one in the world actually knows where these ideas or orders or mandates are coming from. They could be an interplanetary, message. But until then, I was going to ask you, with the internet we have now, if it's not completely controlled, which I don't think it is at this point, so there's still our ability to look into our past, like you were talking about the beaches in the 70s, or even the world's largest person, or what was called the fattest man at the time in the 30s, and anywhere you look at any of those pictures, you're going to see a guy that looks like a small guy that's in the Walmart checkout line right now. These were small by comparison to the people that are living today that we call obese. But another thing, with this internet that we still have, the world's information at the fingertips, basically, you could look back into the near past and see what events changed from the people that were living then to the people that are living now. And, there's various things that you would find. Some of them we're not even allowed to talk about, but some of them we can, like the introduction of sugar in almost every product, and then the replacement of sugar with high fructose corn syrup. And then you get into GMOs and et cetera. And the current technologies that we're not allowed to talk about or even say the name, or said AI that works for YouTube and other platforms will flag us and then we'll be punished. And they even do text, evidently, because if, some of my viewers might know, I'm broadcasting on a backup channel on my end on America in 4K because I was banned over text that came from a mainstream news source. So who knows what's safe to talk about in the eyes of the algorithm, in the eyes of the learning machine AI.
Speaking of flags, I'm looking at an article here off of Electroverse. The past 4 months on Antarctica were the second coldest November to February on record. Australia colder than average summer. Frosty Europe, fresh snows, record lows to pound the U.S., and a very cold March across the U.S. Global cooling, anybody? Hashtag. Are we allowed to talk about that? Because it does seem that there's a lot of inclusion of crops diminishing in yield because of all these extreme events across the planet that we're seeing. And this strong aurora at the very low latitudes, getting Barcelona covered in snow. Mallorca had over a foot of snow at the beach and 3 feet of snow in the mountains. Mallorca, that's like the getaway island in winter for people to go to, and it's covered in snow. California record snow, record gains of ice and snow on Greenland, Antarctica, again, back to the cooler temperatures. Summer snow hitting New Zealand. It's already snowing there. In New Zealand, it's coming out of, remember, summer into fall down in the southern hemisphere as we come into the spring. But please remember the Hungatonga eruption in January of 2022, the max cooling should occur around this month to next month. Within the next 45 days or so, we should reach the maximum of what would be the effect of the onset and disruption of atmospheric flows from the Hungatonga eruption. A lot of that was mesospheric ice clouds that are going to whack the ozone, deplete the column all the way up, and that ozone hole is going to hugely enlarge here coming up in August. That whole event, so whenever it comes to, in about another 30 to 45 days, we will have hit the bottom of whatever effects that caused shall be here for a full another 13 to 14 months. So, we had the eruption, and generally it takes 12 to 14 months for everything to, over historical averages, from the eruption to sun blocking particles, atmospheric changes in clouds, water vapor, etc., for that to set in motion before it's at its maximum is usually a year plus a couple of months. But then it hits on the bottom, and that's what I think we're coming into. Now, if we're going to get already ice and snow onsetting in summer in New Zealand and record of everything, everywhere you're looking now, it's a precipitation record. It's going to amplify for the next year plus. The reason everything's such a huge jump, 10% plus of snow record depth, flood depth, river gauge depth, rainfall total per hour depth, rainfall total per month, the precipitation, everywhere is being smashed. Because the Hungatonga eruption was a water vapor eruption that pushed 10% plus extra of world's moisture in the atmosphere in one day. So prior to last year, we had whatever moisture in the atmosphere that could create clouds and rain. Suddenly, the Hungatonga eruption goes up and adds 10% more to the entire atmosphere in a day. A huge amount of that went up to the mesosphere, which is 30 to 50 miles above our heads. Very dry up there. That's where ozone breaks down if it has a surface of an ice crystal to interact on. Well, the most water vapor, at least in what we know is recorded history and measurements, going back umpteen thousand years, there's never been that much ice crystal in the mesosphere. So what we're about to see with the ozone getting on the ice crystals and breaking down is going to be the most runaway event. Like it'll literally be one of the biblical horses of the apocalypse has left and visible galloping in front of you. The UVB is going to absolutely smash the crops and the yield of the barley, mainly southern hemisphere. But imagine how the world's going to run with that, saying, oh, global warming, this or that. But all these other things are occurring at the same time. Like all these records thing, that's only the first 3 articles off of Electroverse that I read. You know, record cold in Southern California, first ever blizzard warning in Mendocino was down near LAX up into the mountains. San Bernardino, first ever recorded blizzard warning. Portland's snowiest day since 1943, looming Arctic outbreak across Europe. Coast to coast snowstorms felling records by the thousands, blizzard warning off Los Angeles. And it just goes on. And then Sochi, Russia, 13 feet of snow in a single storm. I mean, unprecedented 7.2 feet of snow in Morocco, cutting off 87 villages. You know, this is what is amplifying. So you think about how it's going to be during the summer months when we're growing our crops here in the Northern Hemisphere. It's just going to be more of this, but during the summer, like extremes. For example, we're expecting a 70-mile-per-hour windstorm to come rolling through the valleys of Tennessee. They have called off school for wind tomorrow. This is so far out of the possibilities and probabilities of event. Like, when is the last time, unless you live in Florida, like in Tennessee, it's blocked on many sides by mountains, but to have a windy 70-mile-per-hour wind gust day off from school I don't think I can ever remember that ever happening. And these are the types of events that are going to be onsetting. Now imagine this sweeping across crops, like hailstorm increases in the size. It's all happening, and this is what governments around the world are distracting you away from. Because you're going to be super angry when they realize that 20 years ago they could have warned you about this. Ransom? All right, well, I'll take us out of the hour then.
They didn't want to warn nobody.
3 minutes left here. I'm going to scroll down through another couple articles. More than a foot of snow clipping Mauna Kea, Canada, below 50 degrees Celsius, below zero. We entered the modern grand solar minimum on June 8th, 2020, and it was very noticeable then. But, you know, the electromagnetic effects of an entire planet being disrupted with atmospheric flows, the jet streams and cloud cells, atmospheric, complete disassociation and wandering of all layers, visible for all to see and measurable in 2020. And I'm sitting here going, what was going on during that time to distract away from signs in the skies? And we all know what that was. It's just a little quirky that the beginning, you know, final measured entry point into the solar minimum occurred during 2020. Like, if it hadn't been going on what was happening in 2020 with the vid and 2021, 22, the number one news story would have been this, as scientists pondered indefinitely about how our crops would be affected and how global warming might take a break and how the whole spreading of aerosols in the skies was the real reason it's cooling and it wasn't the grand solar minimum. And we would have gotten into this circle of somebody's not telling the truth here, and they didn't give us enough warning because this grand solar minimum was predicted 20 years ago. Hungry people do crazy things, and your distraction was given to you in the form of a mask instead of the grand solar minimum. Now the crop losses are here, so what's next to distract away from the crop losses associated with the grand solar minimum and the intensification of yield declines year upon year from this point? And it was a couple years ago. You notice the food is less and less. Why do you think your food price keeps going up? Because it's related to this grand solar minimum. As it intensifies and the atmospheric flows get more disrupted, the less food you can grow. It's a one-to-one relationship, and suddenly we have all these distractions and record high food pricing. We should be able to produce the most with the best agriculture and technology at our fingertips ever since humankind began, quote unquote. Yeah, we're sitting here in food shortages. See, there's an overlap. You're being distracted away from the food shortages from every year. You can't grow as much on the planet because of this grand solar minimum. So they fed you global warming instead. And here, you know, it's just going to keep going up and up from here. So my question is, you already know the backstory of why it's happening. What do you think the amplification event will be next? It truly is. The next distraction will be here, but as the food crop losses and the food prices increase and the crop yields decline, they're going to have to be even bigger distractions so you don't notice it and make that your main point of conversation, because once it does, the genie never goes back in the bottle. Not in this generation. We'll be right back. David DuByne here with Ransom Godwin. Appreciate your time. Continue with the connection of events and distractions.
freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
I wanted to talk about hand-cranked radios for just a second because I think they're incredibly important. I myself, I did hours and hours of research on the best hand-cranked radio that could also be a phone charger, emergency light, be able to listen to radio stations, the NOAA weather station in case something happened and you were power out, you could still know what the weather was coming. I personally own this one, the Eaton Red Cross FRX3. It's all hand cranked and there's a small solar panel on top of it. So it's multiple options for recharging, including plug-in. So if something were to happen, hand cranking is the next best option. I would love solar, but it might be a cloudy day. You might be inside a house, but you're going to have to create the power somehow. You hand crank it and ergonomically it slides right in like a book on a bookshelf. I can't believe how long the battery charge lasts on this thing. Even if you leave it up somewhere, like I say, on a bookshelf or in a closet for 6 months, it still has almost a full charge after that period of time.
These crank lights and radios are a must-have. The fact is, if you live anywhere where there's going to be weather, you're going to want to know what's going on. You're going to want to be able to see. And not only that, you're going to want to be able to charge your devices so that you can communicate if the power is out. This is something that you should have if you live anywhere where there's tornadoes, hurricanes, blizzards, etc. It's not whether or not the power is going to go out. It's just when you know that's going to happen. So these are something that you should have handy with you in your car and your backpack. 2 or 3 of them actually would be a good thing to have in several places so that you know that you're going to be able to have light. You're going to have information and maybe communication. Those are 3 main things that you need. And plus, it's cool. You can listen to the radio, which makes the time go by if you're waiting for anything, waiting for the power to come back on. You're going to want to keep your mind occupied, and you're going to want to be able to see what you're doing and also be able to communicate if there is the ability to communicate. And you don't want your devices to be dead when that happens.
In an emergency, you would know where people were moving to. For example, out here in East Tennessee, we have massive wildfires sometimes, and they'll be on the radio broadcasting exactly where the fires are moving. And this is off of what you consider like your AM, FM channels that you would get on your car radio. It depends on which frequency that they're using for that, but they will absolutely tell you where emergency resources are stationed. So if you have to abandon your car, you could be able to get to another place as long as you know the roads, or you might have a map. You'll be able to get to some help or main roads where there's emergency vehicles transiting up and down there. Have this on the go, that it's be able to put it in your hand and still listen to something. It's very lightweight as well. What happens with your communications or even listening to something to be able to understand what's going on in the environment around you? And that's the key to surviving. And Ransom, I know you said this a few times, is understanding your environment, being able to manipulate your environment, and being able to move through that environment to get yourself to safety, to reassess the situation.
Not only that, this is one of the cheapest ways to have insurance so that, whatever happens, if you're on the move, if you have to grab your bag and go, or if you're just at home trapped when the power's out, not only do you know what's going on, but you know if the situation is going to worsen. Imagine all those people that were in several of the different hurricanes that we've had the last couple of years where the power was out. There were a lot of people that didn't know that was coming, and unfortunately they're no longer with us. But I'm sure that people that were prepared and had some radio, they knew where to go. They knew where the relief aid was going to be. They knew which directions the storms were coming, and they knew which directions the water was coming from. So this is a must-have for anybody that wants to know what's going on, and also just having the light.
And you can click on the link in the description box below. And remember, any purchase that you make with the links, whether it be through the podcast in the description box or on the videos across the multiple platforms after we stream, helps us keep this type of information and this show on air so we can continue to bring information and share this information so then you can share with others. And this is truly how it's going to be, is sharing of information, forming communities, and have others that also have some of the same information so we can work as a group versus being on your own alone. That's going to make a huge world of difference, sharing information in communities.
If you wanted to start prepping and taking it serious to get some of these very inexpensive tools that are necessities, why not be prepared for what might happen? Click some of the links, help yourself.
If you appreciate this type of information, click on that link in the description box below. Support our broadcast, our continued mission of bringing you information that can enhance our lives, make our lives more comfortable as we move through this transition. You know, can we pin any of these changes to electrical events that we're seeing? Electromagnetic changes off the sun, electromagnetic changes on our planet that are affecting human resonance, the way we perceive reality? I think we are. We'll talk more about that in the second hour. But if you do consider free speech something that you enjoy, Revolution Radio right here, please consider a donation to keep the station on air, cruising with production costs and making sure that we're able to connect and bring you the information. Super integral right now because, as you can see, the next step of amplification is occurring. So, you know, to start the second hour here, Ransom, I'm wondering what you think about, you know, what do you envision is the next step of amplification? Because I have my own idea in my mind, but I wanted to hear yours first to see where we might go through the rest of 2023. Well, maybe we lost Ransom. He'll pop back on eventually here. But maybe I'll answer my own question. There's going to be an awareness rising of many things on many fronts all at the same time. It's not going to be a single issue that's bubbling. All the issues are going to bubble at the same time. I think it's going to be
the war there that they're pushing for. I mean, they haven't slowed down. Am I not on?
Yeah, go ahead. Now I hear you. Perfect. Huh. That's interesting. It seems there's some interference where that sounds like a huge delay of like 2 minutes or something. That's crazy. Ransom, if you can join again, just say something. I'll give you the floor here. Yeah, it's in and out.
I'm sorry.
It's like that when I walk around with my mobile phone. There's certain parts of the property I can't get any signal. And as I wander into one zone and out of the other, you get, you know, some reception, and sometimes you think you're talking, sometimes you're not.
I was listening to the live broadcast, so I was a little delayed.
There we go. Sorry. Welcome back. Yeah. What do you think 2023 holds for the rest of the distraction, for the rest of the year, the way things are moving?
I think that everything points to that they're going to draw out a decades-long war right there in Western Europe, or Eastern Europe, excuse me. That seems like what they're going to do. And then they're going to try to blame that on the reason that the production has quit. They're going to blame that on the reason that the markets are crashing. That they can milk that for a decade, just like they did the war on terror or any of these other things. I'm kind of glad that they stopped with the well, I don't think they've stopped, but at least they halted temporarily the onslaught of civil liberties around the world with this medical situation that we've had over the last couple of years. But I think they're going to move on from that, and they're going to show the world that, you know, everybody's at odds, so that they will thank them whenever they finally cease the theater of war. And I was showing an article last hour about how many people are moving to Argentina from Russia. Lots of pregnant women and young couples trying to avoid what they think is going to happen there, because from their end of things, they are waiting any day for NATO to first strike them. So they have a whole different set of propaganda going on in Russia about the other side of things, and I'm sure it's the same way in China. And China has not budged. They increasingly say that they will support Russia, and I think that the whole geopolitical dynamic of the situation seems to be a manufactured World War III, World War II repeat. They just moved around the players. And that's what they're going to use to claim that you need to live under rations, that you need to live under reduced power. Um, and I named tonight's show, It's Time We Control Our Own Food. And I think that's never going to be more of a real thing than right now, because even if nothing happens and we live in a great utopia and everybody around the world backs off of their intentions, we would still be in a great position if everyone started living their life in the idea that they could control their own food, not just control it, but create it. And that way they know exactly what's going in their body. And I think a lot of these social issues and sicknesses will start to become a thing of the past if that actually happened. The problem is the masses have no idea and no clue about that entire idea. They weren't raised that way. It's not an idea that they are given as a solution to their life. And I've thought about that many times. If I could go back to when I was a kid, I wish I had somebody that would just, set me straight and tell me, ignore everything except for buying land and starting to control your own food on it. And that way you'll always have security to know that you don't need the world. You don't need their geopolitical events. You don't need their grids or their supply chains to survive where you're at. If you have that power, you are truly free. And I think that's what we need to discover right now. Like we need to figure out how to actually get around the grid and grow our own food, because what they're going to do is put the world in a situation where they're hurting, or the food that they're getting, like that article talking about obese people, the food that they're getting is messing them up, is not nutritious, it's not healthy, and it's destroying their gut biome, which is what we were talking about before. If literally for your health, beyond your diet, if human beings aren't in the same resonance with the energy flow of the earth, all the way from the micro verse there with the bacteriums and the viruses, it builds up to your immune system. And without that connection, true, there are some pretty harsh pathogens and things like that out there, but it seems like as we've been living on the world, we've discovered out of nature almost a counter to almost everything that there possibly can be that makes people sick. And it seems like institution is more concerned about keeping lifelong customers. So they really have no interest in you bettering your life. Only you have that interest to better your life. So through your diet, which includes having an environment where you can actually grow your own food and supply your own products or have barter with other people, I think that's the revolution of the future. It's an embracement of technology, but for the purposes of reconnecting to the earth instead of getting further away from it and further away from that connection. I was laughing on the last part. You were talking about them closing the schools for wind days, and how ironic. The other day we had some 85 mile an hour, 75 mile an hour gusts coming in from Mexico. And just knocking around stuff from El Paso to like Albuquerque, really, really high winds. And right when the kids were getting off the bus from the local school system, my carport was flopping around in the air and almost came off of the house. So you can imagine, the idea that around here, at least, they would never close the school for something like that. When I was a kid, we used to go there and they'd have dust devils and wind days, snow days, ice days. They made us go every day. So you can kind of tell that the reluctance in the past couple of years to even educate your children is there. And you might want to ask yourself why. And I think the reason for that is so that we have a group of young, naive people that will believe any story they're told. And if they're told at the same time by those authoritative sources that it's a bad thing or even punishable to look up your own information or find out how to do things yourself, that's kind of the world we're getting into. Because like right now, any city across the nation
you will find out real quick if you start to try to do your own electric work or your own carpentry work or your own plumbing work. If you get caught by the municipality, they're going to show up, shut you down, and say that you have to have people with licenses to do every bit of that. So people in rural areas, or at least, are in a better position for this one fact that they don't have regulators and government officials so much coming by to check out everything that they do after they're settled in. I understand most places they come there when you're first building your house and when you're putting it, but once you get it situated where it's according to their codes of whatever county you live in, after that you have a lot of privacy. If you live in a municipality, you don't have that privacy. They'll be by all the time, and that includes all of the little projects you have going on to try to grow food and get around the system. So somehow people in urban areas along with rural areas need to find ways to either change their local government and point to a more human-friendly existence so that people can be sustainable and also self-independent with all of their food and needs that they have, including medical. Can you imagine a world where every house you went to, they had some different kind of variation of a medicine or a food that's you're not used to? Because that would be the culture at that time, is for people to be proud of the things they grow, be proud of their connection with nature. And then I think that we could put, our conscious minds into something else, maybe going into space or some of these other things. But as it stands now, it seems like just a fictional illusion that they give the public to keep them distracted from being able to take care of themselves. It's like, America, for example. I'm an American, so I can make an opinion. Right now, we're turning into a country of people that need 30 different opinions and the state to tell them how to wipe their butt in the right way so no one gets offended.
I'm not offended. I'm amused. If you wipe somebody's butt, I would be amused. It's 2023, dude. And such an insane time. I'm always wondering what's going to happen when people look back in like 100 years and think about this time. Think about the Roaring 20s. We look back on it now as sort of a glamorous age, Roaring 20s. I wonder, how much the history will be rewritten to make this as like a golden age of enlightenment and thought. You really just wonder how the history will be written of this time period, looking back at it. And then somebody would find either writings or books or newspaper clippings or a hard drive where they could read all the information again in 100 years from me and Ransom's collection, compared to what the history books for the kids were written, like even just the screen grabs we have today of the madness of the time. How would it be presented in 100 years? Imagine if you had a time machine, you pull up and you had all this gear from today and all the stories and even the live videos and everything saved. And, you're reading about a story and it was 180 degrees different than what you'd seen. And you pulled out all the information and showed it, even though you were alive at the time, people still wouldn't believe you, because the history, the school book said it must be true. You from the time period with the evidence of the time, that's not true. How dare you? So this war thing you got going on here, 10 years, that would explain away supply chain disruptions and cuts forever, right? Like it's going to continually dribble until it's totally closed. They're like turning the faucet half of a quarter turn at a time. But let me tell you two stories. The first of which occurs during World War II rationing, and the other occurs during the Great Depression in the 1930s in America. Now, growing your own food was a tradable at that time. So those who grew the food ended up having and keeping wealth. They fed others. They were able to trade the food for goods that were nearly impossible at the time. Like the amount of labor traded or goods traded just for food was staggering even for the 1930s. So those with farms that could actually not just grow corn, which a lot of people got bankrupt growing corn. They saw those famous images of people putting, dent corn, really hard corn into fires to burn it. Well, there's oil in it. And it's also, it's an organic stalk right there, plus the hardened corn and the shell and that. Oh, did you hear? Oh, that was, there might be some coyotes out tonight I thought that was lightning. There's supposed to be a big storm coming in. Caught me off guard there. But the vegetables and being able to produce foods, animals, etc., kept farmers. People wanted to protect them. They were able to trade. They retained their wealth, and they were able to trade a lot of things for literally pennies on the dollar. That what they produced out of their farms was more valuable. So they were like whatever it was, people would accrue furniture and clocks and suits and just different kind of stuff of the day and different, at that time, quote unquote tractors, brand new thing. People traded all of this for food. Now, I do want to talk about World War II, where the story of who was it that there was a psychologist, super famous one, was telling the story about a woman that had to be in her late 90s, was still holding on to something, and he went to talk to her, and she pulled out this, looked like about the size of 2 cigar boxes, completely stuffed full of gold watches, jewelry, diamond rings, and all these things. And she just starts breaking down, crying, and she's like, this is my secret here. She's holding millions of dollars worth of jewelry from World War II because her job was, as a girl of 10 years old during the war, give people the rations. When they come in with a card, cut off a piece of bread exactly this size and give them one for each card. Well, sometimes people will come in and be so hungry and so like, here, give me 2 slices and I'll give you this diamond ring. She took the jewelry, but she never sold it for her whole lifetime because she considered that her blood payment. So what does that tell you about food? In 2 different chapters of history was more valuable than the things around you. So like the price to put on the food, there's no price on it because it allows life. And I mean, we could put a price. But the food is the thing that's going to be getting less and less available moving forward, especially with the supply chain constricting. If this system continues the way it is, and I'll caveat with that, because, what I was talking about earlier with the electroculture, using copper wiring and tapping from the ether to remagnetize the soils for a higher yield, if we were to move to that, so much copper would be required that there would be no green movement moving forward. The solar panels and windmills would grind to a halt, except for the home usage, not for like grid power, as all that copper would be rediverted into the agricultural industry across the planet. Problem is, fertilizer wouldn't be needed as much, like by 70% plus, even more. The herbicides wouldn't be needed, fungicides not needed nearly at the quantities. So you can see the disruption that this single antiquitech simplicity and off-gridness provides us. If supply chains are going to break down, I think we should have the right and the very fortitude for us to look for different solutions that bypass all of these things that are our bottlenecks. If the supply chain is not going to work to bring me fertilizer and herbicide and pesticide and fungicides, well, then you know what? I'm going to have to do something different. Now, I could go up and make my own soil hummuses, scraping the leaves out of the forest after every year and digging down and, letting an area of forest rest while we harvest around 20 acres or something. And, use that as your compost and humus and the things you plant into or your soil adjuvants. What about putting a copper wire wrapped around a stick into the ground? And nature does its thing because the magnetized soil is back to some sort of equilibrium where the plants themselves are harvesting that ether, from what we understand, envelops the entire planet. It's a vibratory frequency from the sun through the entire solar system. So I'm just wondering, to talk about electrogravitics and anti-gravity craft here on the planet, it's running in that same ether field, although it's more magnified on the Earth because of our particular magnetic field. But if you went off Earth, there has to be, the base resonance of the sun, that would be the base field. We are on and in the Earth, but when you exit our atmosphere, you'd still be in that base magnetic field of the sun. I don't know if you could transit faster or slower. Maybe the Earth hinders it. Maybe by getting off planet, you can, go at the speed of light. But the magnetic field of Mars, it would still work the same principles, although it might be greatly diminished because the magnetic field of Mars is far weaker than here on Earth. But the same rules would apply. If you could tap the magnetic field, it's still a magnetic field of a planet, and it would still make disks move. Now, the speed at which they moved would be different. So there just have to be a step up or step down gearing system involved with that. But still, the ratios and everything would work from magnetic field to magnetic field. But what if you got to Jupiter, close to it, and your machine just started spinning 100 times faster than it would on the Earth? You know, I mean, how much effect is it? Those are the changes we need to have. If we can't have our supply chains and we can break free, like Ransom, I was talking to somebody about gasifiers, wood biomass gasifiers, and also distilling alcohol or making biodiesel. These were all the examples we talked about. You know, say a neighborhood got together and there's 200 homes in there, and everybody in that neighborhood had a 10-gallon still, and all they did was every 2-3 times a year, everybody's fruit mash came out, and they're making thousands of gallons of alcohol in the neighborhood. Nobody ever went and bought any more alcohol. They all could make, their neighborhood could make their own, and they could run all their cars off of it. That would stop in an instant at that type of organization. So imagine if everybody came with biomass gasifiers in a neighborhood of 200, but each house built, something 10 times bigger than their needs, so then they could send power to neighborhoods nearby because they all had biomass gasifiers and came together in a system for redistribution of the power. You got to be kidding me. You just mentioned it. You can't do a thing electrically without them coming down on you. Can you imagine a neighborhood of 200 homes getting together and then sending power to other neighborhoods on what they produce in their own neighborhoods, in their own backyards? Oh my gosh. You'd have a tizzy fit. That would be so... The squads of helicopters would be coming in, people roping down in the neighborhood to stop that. But where we're going, these are the kind of solutions we need. Biomass gasifiers, not biogas, but using wood and extracting the volatiles out of the wood under pressure to create gas that you can burn. And all those chemical, or I shouldn't even say chemicals, but volatiles and liquids inside a piece of wood freshly cut. Or even semi-dry. You're going to produce a gas out of that, a gas that's combustible under pressure. Sink gas is another name for it. Copper wiring, so we don't have to use fertilizers. Like, these are the things we're going to have to do to get off this the centralized delivery supply chains. We're going to have to produce our own electricity, but solar panels isn't going to do it. We're going to have to step onto something bigger, more reliable, more industrial that works at any time. Because anytime you can have a fire, you can have gas to power a generator. You can't get that in a cloudy day with the solar panels. You can't get that in a very doldrums day, no wind, with a wind generator. Concentrating solar power, the only things that are steady would be constant stream flow for a vortex hydro plant, mini hydro, or using biomass, because you can burn something every day, all the time, day or night, and it still produces gas with the pressure to burn to run the generator to then give you electricity. So those are strictly the options we're going to need. Now, what happens when it comes en masse? Are they going to come in and say, no, you can't do that? Because I can envision it. We're going to get off these systems because we have to. We must. But then at what point, does it become too big? Because these stories, I'll tell you, Ransom, these stories here about the jewelry for bread under the ration system, and then, the vegetables and farms, not all. There was a lot that went bankrupt, but the ones that stayed that could provide food became the wealthiest. They bought up all the other neighbors' farms around them, and that kept the families on there. So there was always goodwill in the community by using, that new wealth to help other people stay on their property, stay in their homes. So it's a weird world we're moving into, and 10 years is a long time to think about that happening day upon day.
Yeah, you made the best sci-fi movie in my head right now when you were talking about all that, because, we all know Mad Max and the Thunderdome and Mad Max and all that, in that scenario where they were fighting over gasoline. Just imagine in the near future, though, that gasoline costs so much money that people are resorting to, which is something that I have to admit I've done before when I was poor, is pull up to a methanol well and, half and half your gas tank and all of that. Now, eventually it's going to burn up your motor, but with some slight alterations, which people know, you can change that where it won't destroy your motor vehicle. Now, think about in the near future, if cartels are willing to organize and do things over avocados, marijuana, or cocaine, imagine what they would do whenever they had massive fields of corn, and they knew that there was a demand that they could supply of different fuels to run vehicles, which allows people to still operate. So you could imagine if something happened that actually put the grid down, there would be several groups of people that would form afterwards that had the ability to still and make alcohols and methanols and different things like that. And they would have vehicles, they would have machines, and they would have a small center of industry if they could defend it. But it's a lot easier to defend it if you have machines, surveillance, security, and things to till and all of these things that would be run off of that. But the only way that you could ever have that is with some sort of level of civilization that would have to remain after things, the grid went down for good or whatever it was. There's no way that I don't think that anybody can grow food or meat and protect it without some kind of backup infrastructure. And, there's lots of people that have wells on their properties across the United States. And if those wells aren't attended to, it's obvious that other people with the technical know-how will move in and start trying to make them run or produce something out of them. And those are the people that are going to have power. You could just see a whole new phase of technology actually develop if that scenario ever happened, and where people would be able and unregulated to change the motors and different things on their vehicles to run more efficiently, because we all know that there's different designs out there and patents that's been shelved by big auto, things that would make gasoline last forever, so to speak, in your gas tank, and your car would just drive forever because it would barely be burning anything. We know they have the tech for water powered, engines. We know they have the tech for hydrogen powered machines. They have so much tech that we're not allowed to use, which by itself shows you that the level of control on our prison planet is not designed to ever let innovation take place or human beings as a whole to flourish and ever move off of this planet. So I think that's a fantasy that they push on the public, that one day we're going to go in space, and all of that's part of a distraction to distract you away from the idea, or maybe even the fact that there is only one place probably in this universe where you are made to fit into the natural resonance and the ecosystem of where you came from, and that's the planet Earth. That's exactly where we belong. And it's unfortunate that the governments of the world have made so many rules, regulations, and wars and different situations that keep human beings from being innovative. Basically, we know that we're at a level of technology probably that people could make a small machine that would power their property, no problem, giving them all the electricity that they could ever possibly need to run all of their gadgets and their machines. We have so many ways of making fuel. It should never run out. However, they put you on the idea that the world's burning up, that everything's running out, that we just can't maintain the infrastructure. And all of that is basically a big lie. They talk about the big lie about other things, but that's really the big lie. Because you can imagine if human beings had the ability to just grow their own food, grow their own meat, and grow their own electricity, so to speak, we could be a whole renaissance of technological and all of the arenas of the mind, philosophical, astrological, anything that anybody studies. They would have time to sit around and perfect those things. And all around the world, you would find out that it would be like an epiphany of everyone, that they could, finally reach the limits of their potential. And governments cannot have that. They have to have us on a consumer-based metered system where your food is metered, your power is metered, And in the end, your life force and your lifespan has been metered. And it seems to be that, if you don't believe that that's happening, you can look in any arena of industry, food or whatever you want, and you'll find all of these flaws that cause human beings to have strife and suffer in different ways around the world. Whether you're starving in a third world country or whether you're in a first world country dealing with some kind of diseases or health problems because you've been eating a mix of bush and food like stuffs created in laboratories, basically. The whole world is affected. And it's that idea that they preached to me when I was in college and in high school, is this idea of when globalization meets localization, meaning that events where you live can trigger things all the way around the world, not just from the local environment that you live in or the local economy, but economies around the world. And you imagine that billions of people in China and India and then the rest of Western world were allowed to, flourish instead of strive. We could possibly go to the stars or meet other entities, but as far as things go now, I wouldn't expect any entity out there in the universe to want to make contact with us just based on our system. So instead of that happening, it makes more sense that they would use this artificial matrix that they put across kind of the cloth over all of our eyes and give us something fake, because it seems like that's all we ever receive are fake things, fake cures, fake promises, fake futures. Speaking of that, when you look back into the 50s, all of the great ideas they had for technology, and then in present day, I realized that some of those technologies, they had the skill, the know-how, and the industry to make them a reality, but were held back by the governments. And that's why you're not flying around in a George Jetson car right now. And that's why there's not a little machine in your house converting energy into food. It's because we'll never be allowed to reach that point. So the only option for us as people on the planet is to build our own civilization that's a breakaway civilization from their breakaway, which means you have to have civilization in order to do any of these ideas for survival. Without a small amount of civil discourse between humans and working together, I don't know what we would do. So if we incorporated those ideas just in this side culture of YouTube and social media, and we start sharing these positive ideas, I think it would become a fad for everybody to grow their own food and brag about the things that they're exceptional at.
Well, as long as you brag about something exceptional that helps humanity. There's a lot of people bragging about things that no longer have, worth. I guess in the social eyes of construct, it does, but when it comes, and if it comes, and how hard it comes, those types of things will be, talked about as things that happened in the past when everybody had so much free time. Because me tonight, I'm trying to, I got all these bottles of tincture still with the herb in them that I've been putting together when I find something for the last 6-7 months. And it's time to strain them out. So I bought all these black glass bottles, 4-ounce glass bottles, because the 1 ounces are way too small. So I can get my tincture collection started. And, there's never a dull moment, because you look around through the past, if you know anybody who's old enough, like they always say, their grandparents, you never sat around. Like if you were watching TV, your hands were working, even if it was, to shucking some beans out of the shells, whatever it would be, not oysters, but then you got beans and you crushing them apart or whatever it was to the harvesting. You're ripping a root off something, you're pinching a stem off a piece of fruit or whatever. In mass, like the hands never sat idle. They never just chilled for an hour watching TV. Yeah, they'd watch TV, but at the same time, they were doing something with the hands that needed to be done. Are people willing to accept that? Are they seeking such things? It would be a great utopia in a good way, not the utopia that the World Economic Forum wants for themselves, but if we could blend the best of technologies with the best of regenerative agriculture, there's some startlingly good technology out there to let us grow enough food, but we'd have to manufacture it in mass. But that goes against the whole thing. If we need to get back to the earth again to grow it, you don't want to manufacture a whole bunch more machines and chemicals and things to help you grow food. One, we need to move way away from that. But a lot of people aren't going to want to do it the old-fashioned way. What if you didn't have fuels for your tractor? And I was on my Patreon call tonight on Thursday nights earlier, and somebody was on there telling me and everybody that was in the call tonight about if you are in a grid down and the gasoline will be the first thing to run out in the petrol stations, there'll probably be lots more diesel left in a petrol station than there will be gasoline. Because the amount of diesel cars on the road, and if you can't use it, then you're not going to take it, because even generators like the Honda generators, they're running on gas, they're not running on diesel. So anticipate there being way more diesel in the tanks underground or at the pumps in SHTF. Diesel will be more easily to come by. But also, another thing that was interesting, that if you come by, and if this were to go on and you're talking this Mad Max-ish, you're going to come across a lot of heavy moving equipment, huge machinery, trucks, these kind of big things that are just going to be abandoned. Imagine like a work site that has all the dozers on it, and it's another company's, machinery, and they're just going to leave it there. Backhoes, these kind of things. There's a huge amount of gear fluid and different kind of fluids in those themselves, and you just need a 12-volt pump to remove gallons and gallons and gallons and gallons and gallons of that stuff out of every single one of these, and just throw it all together. And you need about 10% gasoline to pour into it, and you can watch all the molecules drop out, and it becomes clear as it moves down the column. And generally over a 24-hour period, if you add about 10% gasoline into your total volume, all of those fluids and greases, etc., oils, they're all going to start to coagulate at the bottom, and then you siphon off the top, and that is your motor fuel. Exactly what you talked about. That wouldn't destroy the engine. That was super high and super dry. I thought, that's pretty interesting to learn and know about that. Because you got to think that it all originated from the exact same place. Originally, it was one barrel of black or green or yellow crude oil pulled out of the ground. And it all started as a barrel of oil extracted from the earth, and then it went to a refinery and was cracked into all those different very specific molecular chains. So if you have lubricant oil, it's going to be something a little bit shorter chain, so the viscosity, the longer the chain you get, that's why you get plastics. Those are super, super, super long carbon chains. The shorter it is, the gas, up and up. But it's all coming from the same base source. So in a grid down, you got to think, use all the oils and everything you can find out of heavy equipment. Because at that point, would you need the heavy equipment, or would you need the fuel? Or could you replace the fluids back in? If you found somebody who could operate the machine and you had fuel for the machine, could you replace the fluids to get it, like the hydraulics, etc.? But you, not caring, and just somewhere that I needed fuel, and I saw a machine sitting there that obviously was abandoned, I would tap all the lines and get that and turn it into my own fuel. That's just me, though. Are these systems going to go on or offline like that? I have no idea, but seems like Max Payne is inbound with Mad Max here. They really want to change up the society, and super fast.
Well, it's in their benefit, actually, with all the plans that you hear from people in the World Economic Forum and other these groups that plot and plan how the future should be. In that picture is nothing about human beings being in charge of their own lives. Everything that they choose is some kind of control system. So it's kind of up to us, and that's kind of what I was talking about before, is that we're in a unique opportunity right now where we have access to knowledge from prior generations, from technology of today. And this is the best time we've ever had, ever, for any age group. to learn and acquire new skills and have knowledge retained in your actual brain, not on a hard drive, but putting it on a hard drive is not a bad idea either. If you know you got a 10 bucket or whatever, those galvanized steel buckets, and you put a basic computer in there with hard drives full of books, you could bury that. So any EMP that happens, short of a solar flare that wiped out the Earth, I'm pretty sure that you could dig that back up and hook it to some kind of power that you're generating and have blueprints, ideas, know-how of all of these things. And then there's always the books, the straight hardback dinosaur paperback books. I've been accumulating because I see those as small little gold bars. A book on electricity, a book on computer repair, a book on farming, a book on, everything that you could think of, from, sewing, any of that stuff. That is all money. But I have a feeling that it would be more precious or more valuable is if you actually start learning skills of these ideas that we want to know about. Like, how do I go outside and turn my motor into something that will use an alternate type of fuel? All of these ideas, plans, blueprints have already been done and are out there, including some of these magnetic motors and things that you could copy, collect materials, and put back for a what if scenario. And think about this: if everything did go down and civilization, as we know, stopped for one reason or another, whether it was natural or some kind of human-made event, necessarily everyone would have a lot of time on their hands once they figured out how to eat. So obviously the people that can't figure out how to produce food or scrounge food or collect food or get food in some way, shape, or form, they're going to die and they're going to be gone, which is going to leave people that had some kind of know-how or skill that allowed them to survive to the next phase. Now those people are going to have all the time in the world to learn, educate, and collect stuff. So are you going to be one of the first wave of people or the second wave of people is basically what you got to ask yourself. And if you think you're going to make it to that second wave of people, are there other people that you already know and have a relationship with that you could connect with? I think that's just the way of the future is breakaway civilization of people that want to grow their own food, know their own things, and learn their own trades.
Yeah, but of a total 100% population, what percent do you think that would be currently as we sit today versus being pushed that direction on purpose? Because, they want to keep a lot of people in the cities for, a worker bee class, I guess is the best way to put it politely. I don't know. What percentage do you think? I mean, because even if it turned out to be, let's say, a full 20% wanted to embrace it, they loved it. That's the reason they got up in the morning. And, 20% would be a huge amount of people. That'd be 1 billion people plus currently at today's population. But then the other 6.5 billion would be as it is today, or even worse, or more dependent on a system or whatnot. So what's the rollover percentage, I guess, is the question, where it would become such a mass that you would be left alone. Because at some point, when it's a few 100 million, 500 million, something like this, it might be enough to disrupt the system where they'll try to bring everybody back in. But if it becomes 1 to 2 billion people, then it becomes a stratified society where, 25% of the entire planet is doing exactly what you're talking about, embracing it, living off collective usage of land and growing food and doing all these things. And as we envision it might work in communities, helping each other, trading with other communities, still having networks, but nothing with government involved in taxation and these sort of things. Communities. Compared to those that would still be super reliant on the system. Like they would die literally if they weren't in the system and playing with it and completely plugged into it, they would die within 2 weeks. And they know that, and they'll give subservience to the system. But at a 25% or 20%, or what percent do you think swings, and then suddenly they're left alone, and then eventually that gains steam over a generation or two? And how many generations could it take hold and then stay there before then it was re-interfered with and to try to bring us back into this world that we've experienced for the last 6,000 years. Energies are changing, and they're definitely moving to a faster pattern of frequency where most people could see, like if the world hadn't been distracted away for the last 5 years, and if we would have been exactly the way the world was in 2018, people just enjoying the life, you would see through and see everything as crystal clear as you were looking through, a magnifying glass. The frequency change is what you're being distracted from. And now that frequency change is manifesting itself in the cloud cells, the atmospheric patterns, the changes on other planets that are happening, the changes in the sun that are now measurable, the amount of water vapor, the amount of accumulation, the amount of crops not being harvested. All this is calculable and has been calculated now where you can physically see it and measure it. So this is going to, the distraction point from here needs to go up and up. But Ransom, I really do hope we get to that utopian work together society. And that's such a bad way to describe it. More of just like-minded people wanting to live their lives and working together so they can accomplish that and get off more systems. Maybe not 100% off every system, but imagine if you could rid yourself of 50% of the bills and 50% of everything going on this planet where the bases were coming from close to where you live and you were involved in the process.
It's kind of like that Ayn Rand Atlas Shrugged scenario, right? Where a bunch of people decide that they're tired of being regulated and they're tired of being drained off of, and they're tired of people telling them that they can't do certain things. So they just break away and build their own technological civilization hidden amongst ours. And in that version, it was, people with the choice to do freedom instead of like a government one. But, when I think about all of these scenarios that they give us, world war, what was sickness, pandemic, I don't worry about those things because those are the things that they constantly bombard me with. So I do think that they'll have some version of those things happen to us. And that's why they predictively program these things through culture and media. However, if you really think about the scenarios that are altering the whole lifespan of humans, or as far as like an extinction type or a civilization complete reset, those are the things I don't think they would tell you about. Like if you think about it, like if an asteroid was coming in, they would probably say, no, we don't want to panic people. We already know their opinion on aliens with the Brookings Institute report there that said that if you did find an artifact or you found something, we're not to tell the public because, the cohesion of civilization would fall apart. So it wouldn't be like a real thing like that. We kind of know their opinion on that. And there's a big theory out there that they faked the moon landing only to cover up their moon landing, meaning that they did go to the moon, but they also made a fake production of it. But they went to the moon, and what they found there scared them so much that they weren't going to share that. And I think what they found was evidence on the moon that the sun periodically burps so big that it wipes everything off to the point where electrons scar, crystals and stuff like that on the moon, like where you could see the path of literal particles that have scarred through three-dimensional crystals and rock. So there was so much high energy blasting the sun probably. And you can see evidence that they have recovered and brought back from the moon that shows exactly that. So the theory is that's what they found on the moon. And these giant glass domes people talk about were actually big bubbling bubbles of molten, I guess you would call it, what's that, regolith that's on the moon. So all kinds of material just superheated into glass. So imagine what was happening on Earth, having a bigger magnetic field. I'm sure it wouldn't have turned to glass so much on Earth, but maybe in a couple places. But you might see some evidence like a whole half of the planet where all of the animals died or something like that. And who knows if they found that. But think about that. That's something that they would not tell us about. So all of these things that they try to distract you with, world war, famine, it's like the smaller game that they're doing, because I don't think they would actually tell us any real information that would allow us to plan or plot out our futures in the correct way. So the only response to that is plan for everything.
Glass spherules in the black mat layer. That would coincide with what you're describing there. I'd heard the same thing, that there was so much ejecta spit off of the sun in all directions. The proper term, or whatever key term, would be micronova, of our own sun expelling its plasma shell, which is 1,000,000 miles deep, of particles, things that can be measured that have density on them, but in a plasma state, ejected from the sun, that would cool down. And it's just like distilling. At a certain temperature, once you reach that, you put it through your worm to try to cool it down again, to take that gas and recondense it down into a liquid through using cool temperatures. So by the time that ejecta ripped off the sun and was coming this direction, it had been cooling in the regions of space between the sun and our Earth here. So imagine after it pummeled our planet and the moon and kept on going. By the time it had reached Mars, how much that had cooled in, it would have been way like what you consider harder particles. By the time it's reaching out into Jupiter's atmosphere area, it had cooled so much, it would be like sheets of almost hard crystallized plasma rock, for a better term. Because you think about all of the elements that are included in stars. That is a plasma form, and it's an ejecta. But when it gets close and it hits surfaces of objects like the moon, it leaves glass spherules. And, on our own planet, it depends what side it would be on. So if it were on the ocean side, now I'm just quoting what Douglas Vogt had been researching for all these years, and he was explaining the glass spherule idea, that if this same ejecta were to reach the Earth, the oceans would be at 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit for approximately 4 hours. So you have to look at the density of the Pacific Ocean, or an ocean specifically focused on the Pacific, and how fast water would turn into superheated steam at 1,300 degrees, and the full amount of Pacific Ocean, and how much sea level decline that would create by boiling off the ocean, which would then have a subsequent huge amount of problems. Just like the Hunga Tonga eruption, there to be, cloud layers and cloud layers for, generations. But if it were to happen over land, it would burn everything off. I mean, cook every last vegetative bit of anything. And if it were to occur, say, over Asia, the largest continent, all the way from Japan clear over into Europe, let's say, that whole area, if it had, the micronova heat, et cetera, had hit that area, it would burn everything, and that's why they find the black mat. So at least 2 of these events have been recorded in measurable science, charred composition of the entire planet on a layer that can be found everywhere, not cometary impact with the iridium, but actual char layer of whatever went out into the atmosphere. These different layers that we find of cataclysm and char layers in the atmosphere are global and frequent. And you got the glass spherules as well. So, yeah, I'm not sure what happened on the moon. Wasn't alive, so much conjecture. Wasn't it? But there's some ideas they could have gone, but how did they get the glass spherules back from the moon again? And then you're talking about they did, they didn't, they did, they hit it, but now it's a thing. The whole thing is to throw you off the trail that they got the glass spherules up there, understanding that there was a massive event. Is that trackable and traceable to 2042, as Douglas Vogt had said, or is it just part of the greater cycles? And they just don't want you to know, because if you know their cycles, you'll stop paying your taxes. I don't know, Ransom. It's a complicated thing. Round us out for the show. Thanks for joining tonight.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's nature or the powers that be. It seems like the only reasonable, or like a Vulcan would say, the only logical conclusion would be is to start prepping for everything. Start learning about all of the actual skills that you might need to live on the planet Earth. There's nothing wrong with philosophy and all that stuff, but it's hard to grow food or fix your house or do anything with some of those. So some knowledge may not be equal to others, and it seems like we're going into an era where no one's coming to help you except for you. So it's time to grow your own food, prepare for your own future. That's where we're at.
That's where we've always been, except this lucky time we live right now in the interglacial at the end with high technology that we don't have to do that anymore. That's why people are so surprised. Why do I want to move to a farm? At least the older generation, they came from the farms inland. They think it's too much work. Their parents, they're living in neighborhoods. They don't want the farm. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye for now. David DuByne, Ransom, Godwin, signing off.